Optional parameters are used when you want to create a function but you're not sure if a parameter will always be necessary. You can specify optional parameters by adding an equal sign followed by a value into the list of parameters. This will inform the compiler that this local variable has a default value. Let's take a look at the example. So our simple function called increment will return an integer and take in 1 but potentially 2 integers. So all we want to do here is we can say return num plus count. If our function is just called using one parameter, then it'll assume count is 1, so it'll just increment by 1. If they specify the count variable, then it'll add on whatever that value that's specified by the user. So we define an integer called I, and we make it 1, and then we say I is equal to increment I. And because there's no second parameter, then it will just take the value of 1, and it will just essentially do I++, which will add 1 to I. If you put in a comma here, you can see it's denoted by the square brackets. The square brackets means that this parameter is now optional. We took the value of 1 and we've incremented it, so the value should now be 2 here. And then now in our second example, we're actually calling the function using the count variable. So now it's going to increment by 10. So it's going to take the 2 value and increment it by 10. So now this should be 12. Let's just run it. Press F5. Now we can see it's working. So let's have a look and see how this is built. So we can start with our simple int I equals 1. So we can create a function called static int increment, takes in int num, and then let's just return num plus 1 just because we want to increment. So now we could say I is equal to increment, and then we want to increment I. Let's just print I. Now we have the values too. That's perfect. So now let's build in the functionality to be able to specify a bigger value to increment by. So we can add another parameter called int count, and then now we'll get a syntax error because we have to include 2 parameters because we haven't added the equals. So now let's add the equals, and we can say equals 1 to default count to being 1. And now let's replace this 1 with our new count variable. So now our code shouldn't have changed because the output is now 2. So now we can write some more code. I equals increment, I, and then 10. And then let's print out I again. Now we should see 12. Perfect. You may not have heard of optional parameters, and the reason for that is not a lot of languages support them. A lot of the time, people would generally suggest you use function overloading. So what I mean by that is, so we can have another function called static int increment, and we can just have an int num and an int count. And if we remove count from this function, and remove it from here, and we can just return num plus 1. We're getting a syntax error here because it says not all code paths return a value because we haven't done anything yet. So now we can just do return num plus count. Now you see what happened is we have 2 functions called increment, and they both take in different parameters and they return different values. So now our code shouldn't actually change, it still outputs 2 and 12. This is the preferred method because not a lot of languages provide optional parameters functionality. So I would rather you get used to this notation than get used to the optional parameters, so when you change languages, you won't be disappointed that it's not supported. If you're unsure on how to do this, or this is slightly confusing for you, then I have a separate video on this that you can watch, clicking the banner above. Let's just have a quick recap though. We've defined our int I equals 1, and we've assigned the value of increment with 1 parameter, and then later on we have increment with 2 parameters. And the reason why this works is because of function overloading. We have 2 sets of functions with different parameters. The first one we'll call the first function, and the second one we'll call the second function, because in the first case you only want to increment it by 1 always, and in the second case you want to increment it by 10. What we had previously was this function was gone, and we had an int count equals 1, and then we replaced the 1 with count. And this was an okay implementation for C#, but this won't apply to other languages. So just keep an eye out if you're going to use this in C#, don't get too used to it because other languages might not support it. This has been optional parameters in C#. This video is made possible by my awesome Patreons, DP Unique and Tominator. Thank you so much for your continued support. If you have any questions, comment them below or join the Discord server to gain your own personal help channel for instant access to answers. I'm currently creating my C# course, or it could already be finished by the time you see this, so please make sure to check the banners above or the description as the link may already be there. The course will cover tutorials, tasks, exercises, and projects in order for you to never enter tutorial hell and be able to write amazing programs all on your own. I'll be providing discount for my subscribers and Patreons, So if this interests you, make sure you subscribe and stay up to date with the channel. I'll see you in the next one.